Staff Sergeant Maria Santos knelt in the dirt behind the shooting range at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Her hands moved with practiced skill as she field-stripped her M4 rifle for the third time that morning. The weapon had been jamming during qualification rounds, and she knew exactly why. Someone had tampered with her rifle again. "Look at Santos," came a mocking voice from behind her. "Still playing soldier, I see." Maria didn't turn round. She recognized the voice of Sergeant First Class Rick Hoffman, a man who had made her life miserable for the past 6 months. His cronies snickered behind him like a pack of hyenas. "Maybe if you spent less time pretending to be one of the boys, and more time learning how to maintain your weapon, you wouldn't be sitting in the dirt," Hoffman continued, his voice dripping with contempt. Maria's jaw tightened, but she kept working. She had learned long ago that responding to Hoffman only made things worse. Instead, she focused on cleaning the bolt carrier group, removing the sand and debris that had been deliberately packed into the mechanism. This wasn't the first time. Someone had sabotaged her equipment, and she doubted it would be the last. "Cat got your tongue, Santos." Hoffman stepped closer, his shadow falling across her workspace. "Or are you finally realizing you don't belong here?" The truth was, Maria belonged here more than any of them knew. But that truth was buried deep in classified files, hidden behind layers of military bureaucracy and national security protocols. All they saw was a woman who had transferred from a support unit, someone they assumed had never seen real combat. They had no idea what she had endured, what she had sacrificed, or what she had lost. "Hoffman, don't you have somewhere else to be?" came another voice. Maria looked up to see Corporal Jake Martinez approaching. Jake was one of the few soldiers who treated her with respect, though he didn't know her full story either. "Mind your own business, Martinez," Hoffman snarled. "Unless you want to join your girlfriend in the dirt." Maria's hands stilled for a moment. She appreciated Jake's attempt to help, but she couldn't let him suffer for her sake. Too many good people had already paid a price for knowing her. "It's fine, Jake," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "I've got this." Jake hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but Maria's firm look told him to let it go. He nodded reluctantly and walked away, leaving her alone with Hoffman and his group. "Smart girl," Hoffman said with a cruel smile. "You're learning your place." As the group moved on, their laughter echoing across the range, Maria returned to her rifle. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back years of frustration and pain. She had been one of the most decorated soldiers in her previous unit, had saved lives and completed missions that would never see the light of day. But here she was just another woman trying to prove herself in a man's world. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had requested this transfer, had specifically asked to be placed in a unit where nobody knew her history. She wanted a fresh start, a chance to serve without the weight of her past hanging over her. But she hadn't expected the isolation, the constant questioning of her abilities, or the deliberate sabotage of her equipment. Maria finished reassembling her rifle and ran a quick function check. Everything seemed to be in working order now. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and walked to the firing line. The qualification course was still in progress, and she needed to complete her scores before the day was over. As she took her position, she noticed several soldiers watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. They were waiting for her to fail, expecting her to wash out like they believed all women eventually did. The pressure was immense, but Maria had faced worse odds before. She loaded her magazine, chambered around, and took aim at the first target. The familiar weight of the rifle in her hands brought back memories of other ranges, other targets, other missions where the stakes were life and death. Those memories gave her strength, reminding her who she really was beneath the surface. The first shot rang out, hitting the target dead center, then another, and another. Maria's breathing was controlled, her stance perfect, her aim true. With each shot, she felt a small measure of vindication. They could sabotage her equipment, mock her presence, and question her abilities, but they couldn't take away her skill. When the shooting stopped, Maria had achieved a perfect score. The range fell silent as the electronic scoreboard displayed her results. Even Hoffman seemed speechless, his confident smirk replaced by a look of grudging surprise. But Maria knew this was just the beginning. A good shooting score wouldn't change their minds about her. If anything, it might make them more determined to prove she didn't belong. She holstered her weapon and walked back toward the barracks, feeling the weight of their stares on her back. That night, as she lay in her narrow bunk, Maria stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe she should have. stayed in her old unit where her reputation preceded her and respect was never questioned. But then she remembered why she had left, and she knew there was no going back. 3 weeks later, the mood at Fort Campbell shifted dramatically. Word spread through the base like wildfire. General Patricia Hayes was coming for an unannounced inspection. General Hayes was a legend in the army, a combat veteran who had risen through the ranks during some of the military's most challenging years. Her reputation for being tough but fair preceded her, and every soldier on base knew that her visit meant serious business. Maria was in the motor pool working on a Humvee transmission when Sergeant Major Williams approached her. Williams was the kind of non-commissioned officer who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation, and Maria had always appreciated his straightforward manner. "Santos, I need you to join the honor guard for the general's arrival," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Maria looked up from under the hood, surprised. "Me, Sergeant Major, are you sure? You're one of the sharpest soldiers in this unit, despite what some people might think," Williams replied. "Your uniform standards are impeccable, your bearing is professional, and frankly, I need someone I can count on not to embarrass us." Maria felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months. Someone finally recognized her worth, even if they didn't know the full extent of her background. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Williams said with a slight smile. "Formation is at 0800 tomorrow. Full dress uniform, spit-shined boots, the works." As Williams walked away, Maria noticed Hoffman approaching with his usual swagger. Well, well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone in the motor pool to hear. "Looks like someone's getting special treatment. I wonder what Williams sees in our little mechanic here." The implication in his voice was clear, and Maria felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. Several other soldiers stopped what they were doing to listen, sensing drama brewing. "Maybe he sees a soldier who actually does her job," Maria replied, her voice steady but firm. Hoffman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, a soldier. Is that what we're calling it now?" He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but when the general sees what a joke this unit has become, heads are going to roll, and I'll make sure yours is first." Maria met his gaze without flinching. "Then I guess I'd better not give her any reason to complain about my performance." The stalemate was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, the battalion commander, rounded the corner with his aide in tow. "What's the situation here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Just discussing tomorrow's formation," Sir Hoffman said quickly. Snapping to attention, Davis looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Hoffman, don't you have inventory to complete in the supply room?" "Yes, sir." Hoffman shot Maria one last venomous look before walking away. Davis turned to Maria. "Santos, I've heard good things about your work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, surprised by the unexpected support. That evening, Maria spent extra time preparing her dress uniform. She pressed every crease to perfection, polished her buttons until they gleamed, and cleaned her boots until she could see her reflection in them. As she worked, she thought about General Hayes and what the visit might mean. The next morning dawned. Clear and cold, Maria took her position in the honor guard formation, standing perfectly straight with her rifle at port arms. She had deliberately chosen a spot toward the back, not wanting to draw unnecessary attention to herself. But as she stood there, she felt a familiar sense of pride in her uniform and her service. The general's convoy arrived precisely on time. General Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle, and Maria was struck by her commanding presence. The general was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing confident and professional. This was a soldier's soldier, someone who had earned her rank through merit and dedication. As General Hayes inspected the honor guard, Maria kept her eyes forward and her breathing steady. But when the general paused in front of her, Maria felt her heart rate increase slightly. From the corner of her eye, she could see General Hayes, studying her intently. "Outstanding turnout, soldier," General Hayes said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Thank you, ma'am," Maria replied, her voice strong and clear. General Hayes moved on, but Maria noticed that she glanced back, once before continuing down the line. After the inspection, the honor guard was dismissed, and Maria began to walk back toward the motor pool. She was almost there when she heard someone call her name, Staff Sergeant Santos. Maria turned to see General Hayes's aide approaching. "The general would like to see you in the conference room in 10 minutes, he said. Maria's mind raced. Had she done something wrong during the inspection? Was this about her transfer request? Or worse, had someone like Hoffman made a complaint about her? Did she say what this was about? Maria asked. The aide shook his head. Just said to bring you to the conference room. 10 minutes. As Maria made her way across the base, she tried to calm her nerves. Whatever this was about, she would face it with dignity and honesty. She had served her country with honor, regardless of what her current unit thought of her, and no one could take that away from her. She arrived at the conference room with 2 minutes to spare and knocked on the door. Enter, came General Hayes's voice from inside. Maria stepped into the room and came to attention. Staff Sergeant Santos reporting as ordered. Ma'am. General Hayes was seated at the conference table, studying a thick folder. She looked up at Maria with those penetrating eyes and gestured to a chair across from her. Please, sit down, Sergeant Santos. We have a lot to discuss. Maria sat down carefully, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. General Hayes continued to study the folder for a moment longer before closing it and looking directly at her. Tell me about your rifle. Malfunction yesterday, General Hayes said unexpectedly. Maria blinked, surprised by the question. Ma'am, your M4. I was told it was jamming during qualification. What did you find when you cleaned it? Maria hesitated. She could tell the truth about the sabotage, but that would sound like making excuses or trying to cause trouble. The bolt carrier group had some debris in it, ma'am. Sand and small particles that interfered with the cycling action. Sand, General Hayes repeated thoughtfully. Interesting. And where do you suppose that sand came from? The range is paved, and yesterday was dry. The question hung in the air between them. Maria realized that General Hayes already knew more than she was letting on. I couldn't say for certain, ma'am. General Hayes leaned back in her chair. I've been watching this unit for longer than you might think, Sergeant Santos. I have my ways of keeping track of what happens at my installations. She paused. I know about the harassment, I know about the equipment sabotage, and I know you've been handling it with remarkable restraint. Maria felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Ma'am, I don't want to cause any trouble for my fellow soldiers. Your fellow soldiers, General Hayes said with a slight edge to her voice, should be treating you with the respect you've earned. But we'll come to that in a moment. She opened the folder again. First, I want to talk about your previous assignment. Maria's blood ran cold. Her previous assignment was classified at levels that most people would never see. If General Hayes had access to that information, it meant this conversation was about to take a very different turn. I see from your record that you were part of something called the Kraken unit, General Hayes continued, watching Maria's reaction carefully. Quite an impressive service record. 12 deployments, multiple combat actions, several commendations, that I can't even read because of their classification level. Maria remained silent, knowing that anything she said could potentially compromise operational security. The Kraken unit, General Hayes mused. Even I don't have clearance for most of what you did over there, but I do know that your unit was responsible for some of the most sensitive and dangerous missions our military has ever undertaken, and I know that you were one of their best operators. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. For months, she had been treated like an outsider, a pretender, someone who didn't belong in a combat unit. To hear her true service acknowledged by someone of General Hayes's stature was overwhelming. So imagine my surprise, General Hayes continued, when I find one of our most decorated special operations veterans being harassed and undermined by soldiers who couldn't even qualify for the units you've served in. Maria's throat tightened with emotion. Ma'am, I requested this transfer. I wanted to serve in a regular unit, to have a normal military experience. I know you did, and I know why. General Hayes's voice softened slightly. The loss of your unit in Afghanistan, the classified nature of the mission that prevents you from receiving public recognition for your sacrifices, the survivor's guilt that made you want to disappear into anonymity. Tears threatened to spill from Maria's eyes, but she held them back through sheer force of will. How do you know about that, ma'am? Because I was the one who authorized a mission, General Hayes said quietly, and I was the one who had to write the letters to 17 families, explaining why I couldn't tell them exactly how their sons and daughters died serving their country. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Maria felt as if the weight of the world had shifted on her shoulders. To know that the person responsible for that mission was sitting across from her, to see the pain in General Hayes's eyes, was almost too much to bear. You were the only survivor of Kraken Unit's final mission, General Hayes continued. It completed the objective despite impossible odds, saved the lives of 3 captured pilots, and extracted intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil, and then you requested to be transferred to a regular unit where nobody would know your name or your story. I couldn't handle the attention, Maria whispered. Every time someone thanked me for my service, all I could think about were my teammates, who didn't come home. It felt wrong to accept praise when they were the real heroes. General Hayes nodded with understanding. I've felt the same way about many of the soldiers I've sent into harm's way. But hiding from your accomplishments doesn't honor their memory, Sergeant Santos. It dishonors it. Maria looked up, meeting the general's eyes for the first time since the conversation began. Your teammates died doing what they believed in, General Hayes said firmly. They died protecting this country and the values it represents. When you allow lesser soldiers to diminish your worth, when you accept treatment that you would never tolerate if it were directed at one of your fallen comrades, you're allowing their sacrifice to be diminished as well. The words cut deep because they were true. Maria had been so focused on her own guilt and pain that she hadn't considered how her passivity might be affecting the legacy of her fallen unit. What would Sergeant First Class Rodriguez say if he saw how Hoffman was treating you? General Hayes asked, naming Maria's former team leader from memory. What would Staff Sergeant Chen think if she knew you were allowing your equipment to be sabotaged without fighting back? Maria's resolve began to harden. Rodriguez would have been furious. Chen would have demanded justice. They had all fought too hard and sacrificed too much for her to simply accept defeat at the hands of bullies and cowards. You're right, ma'am, Maria said, her voice growing stronger. I've been dishonoring their memory. Now, here's what we're going to do, General Hayes said, leaning forward. I'm going to address this unit's leadership about the harassment and sabotage, but more importantly, I'm going to give you the opportunity to show these soldiers exactly who they've been underestimating. Maria felt a spark of her old fire returning. What did you have in mind, ma'am? General Hayes smiled, and, for the first time in the conversation, it was a genuine expression of warmth and approval. How do you feel about a little demonstration of your actual capabilities? The next morning, General Hayes called an emergency formation for the entire battalion. Word had spread quickly through the base that something significant was happening, but nobody knew exactly what. Maria stood with her unit, trying to keep her expression neutral despite the churning in her stomach. General Hayes took the podium with her characteristic, commanding presence. Behind her, several senior non-commissioned officers and officers stood at attention, including Sergeant Major Williams and Lieutenant Colonel Davis. Maria noticed that Hoffman kept glancing in her direction with a smug expression, probably assuming she was about to be disciplined or transferred. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hayes began, her voice carrying easily across the formation. I've been observing this unit for several weeks now, and I've identified some serious issues that need to be addressed immediately. A murmur ran through the ranks before being quickly silenced by sharp looks from the NCOs. It has come to my attention that some members of this unit have been engaging in conduct unbecoming of soldiers. General Hayes continued. Harassment, sabotage of equipment, and the creation of a hostile work environment. This stops now. Maria could feel eyes turning toward her, some sympathetic, others suspicious. Hoffman's smug expression was beginning to fade as he realized this wasn't going the way he had expected. Furthermore, General Hayes said, her voice growing harder, I've discovered that some of you have been questioning the qualifications and abilities of your fellow soldiers, based on nothing more than prejudice and ignorance. The general paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Today we're going to have a little demonstration. I want to see exactly what kind of soldiers I have in this unit, and I want everyone to understand exactly who they're serving. Alongside, General Hayes gestured toward a nearby table where several weapons and pieces of equipment had been laid out. We're going to conduct some impromptu proficiency tests. Marksmanship, tactical movement, equipment maintenance, and combat medicine. Volunteers will be selected to demonstrate their skills. Maria's heart began to race. She had a feeling she knew where this was heading. Sergeant First Class Hoffman, General Hayes called out, step forward. Hoffman marched to the front of the formation, his chest puffed out with confidence. He had always prided himself on being one of the better soldiers in the unit, and this was his chance to prove it. Staff Sergeant Santos, General Hayes called next, joined Sergeant Hoffman. Maria stepped forward, ignoring the whispers and murmurs from the formation behind her. She took her place next to Hoffman, who shot her a contemptuous look. We'll start with marksmanship, General Hayes announced. Both soldiers will engage targets at increasing distances, starting at 100 meters and moving back to 500 meters. standard issue M4 rifles, iron sights only. Maria and Hoffman were escorted to the firing line. As they prepared their weapons, Hoffman leaned over and whispered, "Hope you're ready to embarrass yourself in front of everyone, Santos." Maria didn't respond. Instead, she focused on her breathing and her stance, falling back on years of training and combat experience. The familiar weight of the rifle felt good in her hands, and for the first time in months, she felt completely in her element. The first targets were at 100 meters. Both soldiers fired their allotted rounds, with Hoffman achieving a respectable grouping and Maria placing all of her shots in the center ring. As they moved back to the 200-meter line, Hoffman's confidence remained high, but Maria could see doubt beginning to creep into his expression. By the time they reached the 300-meter line, the difference in their abilities was becoming clear. Maria's shots remained consistently accurate, while Hoffman's groupings began to spread. At 400 meters, several of Hoffman's shots missed the target entirely, while Maria continued to hit center mass with mechanical precision. The final stage was at 500 meters, the limit of effective range for an M4 with iron sights. It was a challenging shot even for experienced marksmen, requiring precise windage and elevation adjustments. Hoffman fired his rounds quickly, eager to get the embarrassing display over with. Only 2 of his 5 shots hit the target, and neither was particularly well placed. Maria took her time reading the wind and adjusting her sight picture carefully. Her first shot hit dead center. The second was slightly to the right, but still in the scoring rings. Her third, fourth, and fifth shots formed a tight grouping that would have been impressive even with a scoped rifle. The range fell silent as the electronic scoreboard displayed the results. Maria had achieved a perfect score at every distance. Hoffman's scores showed a steady decline as the range increased, and his final score was barely passing. But General Hayes wasn't finished. "Excellent shooting, both of you," she said diplomatically. "Now let's move on to tactical movement and room clearing." The next hour was a masterclass in military proficiency. Maria moved through the tactical course with fluid precision, her movements economical and purposeful. She cleared rooms with textbook technique, communicated clearly with hand signals, and demonstrated a level of tactical awareness that impressed even the most experienced NCOs watching. Hoffman, by contrast, struggled with the more complex scenarios. His movements were clumsy, his communication unclear, and his tactical decisions questionable. It was becoming obvious to everyone present that there was a significant difference in their training and experience levels. The final test was combat medicine. Both soldiers were presented with a simulated casualty scenario involving multiple wounds and a complex medical situation. Hoffman did his best, but his treatment was basic and Maria, however, moved with the confidence of someone who had performed these procedures under fire in real combat situations. Her treatment was swift, comprehensive, and professional. When the demonstrations were complete, General Hayes addressed the formation again. "What you've just witnessed should be a lesson to all of you about the dangers of making assumptions about your fellow soldiers." She gestured toward Maria. "Staff Sergeant Santos has been serving in this unit for 6 months. During that time, some of you have questioned her abilities, harassed her, and even sabotaged her equipment. You've treated her as if she doesn't belong here, as if she's somehow less qualified than you are." The general's voice grew harder. "What you don't know is that Staff Sergeant Santos is one of the most highly trained and experienced combat veterans in the entire United States Army. She has more combat deployments than most of you have years in service. She has saved lives, completed missions at the highest levels of classification, and served with distinction in units that most of you couldn't even qualify to join." Maria could see the shock and disbelief on the faces in the formation. Hoffman looked as if he had been physically struck. "The harassment stops now," General Hayes declared. "The sabotage stops now. The disrespect stops now. Staff Sergeant Santos has earned her place in this unit and in this army through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." The general paused, scanning the formation with her penetrating gaze. "Dismissed." As the formation broke up, Maria found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to apologize, to explain, or simply to understand what they had just learned. But her eyes were on Hoffman, who was walking away with slumped shoulders and a defeated expression. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, only sadness that it had taken so long for the truth to come out. That evening, Maria sat alone in the day room, still processing everything that had happened. The demonstrations had been cathartic in a way, but they had also stirred up memories and emotions she had been trying to keep buried. She was staring out the window when she heard footsteps behind her. Mind if I join you? It was Sergeant Major Williams, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Not at all, Sergeant Major, Maria replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. Williams settled into the chair across from her and studied her face in the lamplight. Hell of a day, he said finally. Yes, it was. I owe you an apology, Williams said. I should have seen what was happening and put a stop to it months ago. A good NCO protects his soldiers, and I failed you. Maria shook her head. You couldn't have known. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to help me. Maybe not, but that's no excuse. Williams took a sip of his coffee. General Hayes filled me in on some of your background. Not the classified stuff, but enough to understand what you've been through. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Williams spoke again. You want to tell me about the Kraken unit? Maria looked at him, weighing her words carefully. What do you want to know? Whatever you're comfortable sharing. I've been in the army for 23 years, and I've never even heard of a unit by that name. Maria smiled sadly. That was kind of the point. We were a joint special operations unit tasked with the missions that were too sensitive or too dangerous for the regular special forces units. Deep cover operations, hostage rescue, in denied areas, counter-terrorism operations that couldn't officially exist. How many people were in your unit? 18. We were all cross-trained in multiple disciplines: combat, medicine, demolitions, communications, languages. Most of us had been recruited from other elite units based on specific skills or psychological profiles. Williams nodded thoughtfully. And you lost them all in Afghanistan. Maria's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Not all at once. We lost 3 on a mission in Syria, 2 more in Iraq. But the big one, the one that ended the unit, was in the Hindu Kush Mountains. We were tasked with rescuing 3 pilots whose helicopter had been shot down behind enemy lines. She paused, the memories flooding back despite her efforts to keep them at bay. Intelligence said it was a small group of Taliban fighters holding them, maybe a dozen hostiles, poorly equipped and disorganized. We went in expecting a quick extraction. Maria's voice grew quieter. It was a trap. They had been feeding us false intelligence for weeks, drawing us into an ambush. There were over 100 fighters waiting for us, well armed and positioned in prepared defensive positions. Williams waited patiently, recognizing that she needed to tell this story in her own way. We fought for 18 hours, Maria continued. We managed to reach the pilots and get them out, but we lost 13 members of our team doing it. I was the only one who made it back to the extraction point alive. How did you survive? Maria was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I did, she said finally. The person who came back from that mountain wasn't the same person who went up it. That's why I requested the transfer. I thought if I could just be a regular soldier again, maybe I could find some peace. And instead you found Hoffman and his crew. Instead I found people who reminded me that running away from who you are doesn't change anything. Maria looked at Williams directly. General Hayes was right. My teammates would be ashamed of how I've been handling things here. Williams leaned forward. What are you going to do now? Before Maria could answer, there was a knock at the door. Jake Martinez poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. They followed Jake outside to the parking lot, where a small crowd had gathered around Hoffman's car. As they got closer, Maria could see that someone had spray-painted "Coward" across the windshield and slashed all 4 tires. Who did this? Williams demanded. Nobody saw anything, Jake replied. But there's more. Someone broke into Hoffman's room and trashed it. And word is spreading about what happened today. Half the base knows about the demonstration by now. Maria felt a sick feeling in her stomach. This wasn't justice. It was mob mentality, and it was exactly the kind of thing she had hoped to avoid. This has to stop, she said firmly. This isn't how we handle things. Williams looked at her with surprise. Santos, after everything he put you through, you're going to defend him. I'm not defending what he did, but I'm not going to stand by and watch him be destroyed either. We're supposed to be better than that. The next morning Maria sought out Hoffman. She found him in the supply room, looking defeated and exhausted. His face was bruised, and she suspected he had been in a fight with some of the soldiers who had been harassing him since the previous day's revelations. Hoffman, she said quietly. He looked up, and she could see a mixture of shame and defiance in his eyes. Come to gloat, come to talk. Maria pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. This has to stop. The vandalism, the harassment. It's not solving anything. Hoffman laughed bitterly. Little late for that, don't you think? My reputation is shot, my career is probably over, and half the base thinks I'm a piece of garbage. Your career doesn't have to be over, Maria said, but you need to understand something. I never wanted any of this to happen. I didn't ask General Hayes to humiliate you, and I didn't ask for special treatment. Then what did you want? Hoffman asked, his voice raw with emotion. I wanted to be left alone to do my job. I wanted to serve my country without having to prove myself every single day. I wanted to find some peace after losing my entire unit in Afghanistan. Hoffman was quiet for a moment, processing what she had said. I lost friends too, he said finally. In Iraq, 2 of my best friends died in an IED attack, and I wasn't even there to help them when I came back. I was angry all the time, at the enemy, at the army, at everyone who hadn't been through what I had been through. Maria nodded with understanding. And when I showed up, I became a target for that anger. Yeah, I guess so. You were different. You didn't talk about your deployments like the rest of us, and you seemed so controlled. It made me think you hadn't really seen combat, that you were just playing soldier. I understand, Maria said, but that doesn't excuse what you did. Sabotaging my equipment could have gotten someone killed if we had been deployed. I know, Hoffman said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. Maria studied his face and saw genuine remorse there. Apology accepted. But now we need to figure out how to move forward. Over the next few weeks, Maria and Hoffman worked together to repair the damage that had been done to the unit's cohesion. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but gradually the atmosphere began to improve. Maria began sharing some of her combat experiences during training sessions, helping younger soldiers learn from her mistakes and successes. Hoffman, meanwhile, began the difficult process of rebuilding his reputation and relationships within the unit. General Hayes visited the base one more time before Maria's tour was complete. She found Maria in the motor pool, working on a Humvee engine with 2 junior soldiers who were hanging on her every word as she explained the finer points of military vehicle maintenance. Staff Sergeant Santos, a word, the general called out. Maria wiped her hands on a rag and walked over. Yes, ma'am. I've been getting good reports about this unit's progress. Seems like morale has improved significantly. It has, ma'am. We're working through our issues. General Hayes nodded approvingly. I have a proposition for you. I'm putting together a new special operations unit, one that will focus on training and mentoring rather than direct action missions. I need experienced operators who can pass on their knowledge to the next generation. Interested? Maria considered the offer carefully. A few months ago, she would have declined without hesitation, but now, having found some measure of peace with her past and purpose in her present, she felt ready for a new challenge. Will I be able to help soldiers who are struggling like I was? She asked. That would be a big part of the job. Maria smiled. Then yes, ma'am, I'm very interested. As General Hayes walked away, Maria returned to her work with the junior soldiers. For the first time since losing her unit in Afghanistan, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The ghosts of her fallen teammates would always be with her, but now she carried them as a source of strength rather than guilt. Her patch, the Kraken unit patch that had remained hidden under her uniform for so long, was now displayed proudly on her sleeve. It was a reminder of who she had been, who she was, and who she was still becoming. And finally, that was enough.